Xiaoyuan, please briefly introduce yourself.
Yeah. Great. So, hi everyone. I'm Charlene or Xiao Yuan, and currently I'm the founder and director of MyH2O, a water information platform. And I graduated from MIT in 2017, and I've came back to China to work on my organization full time for about a year so far. And before in my grad studies, what I researched on was the water and sanitation database in rural India and how to design data-driven policy based on the existing data systems. And that's when I had the idea about a similar type of data system within China, also on rural water and sanitation issues. So it pushed me to start the current organization that I have, MyH2O. Yeah.
Could you tell us what this organization specifically do? What kind of thing that you're doing right now?
Yeah. So MyH2O is a rural water information network. So what it does is that we send out a lot of field teams to go into the field to collect rural water and sanitation related information, going really deep into each of the communities to gather that information, and then to build them onto an information platform that allows interactive and effective display of these information with the ultimate goal to guide decision making of people with resources and solutions so that they can better enter these rural communities. So basically what we're trying to create is a data platform that helps better match demands of clean water to people with solutions and people with resources so that they can better connect with each other through this platform that we have. Yeah.
Why did you choose to do this thing?
Yeah, so I think to begin with, like both my parents are from rural communities, so that was something that always pushed me to think about how can I serve these communities better. And I also watched their own wells dried up over the years, and now they're drinking from tanker water, which source, like the exact source of the water, they also don't really know. And a lot of my people in the family also have stained teeth, which is likely from fluoride in the water. So a lot of these things you see as you grow up, but you never really notice until I started to study about clean water issues, and I realized that not having that awareness could really be an issue for a lot of these rural communities. And on the other hand, my graduate research was focused a lot on also going into rural India. So when I went into rural India, I started to hear a lot of very interesting stories about these different communities. For example, there was one family that had arsenic contamination in their water, and there's local people coming in and telling them that you can't drink your water, and we'll provide you with alternative sources of water. But then this family refused that, and they kept drinking the water because they were under the impression that if other people know that their water is contaminated, they can't marry their daughter. So they'd rather keep drinking this type of water and keep getting sick than to not have their daughter marry off to a good family because they're so poor, and they really want their daughter to marry off well. So a lot of these really kind of realities are things that you won't really know until you go into these communities and survey their needs and demands and listen to their stories. And then also, the story part is the really important part, because if you just go there and collect that data, the data tells you one thing. But then if you actually go in there and listen to their voices, that's another layer of things. Because for some areas, they have these types of problems, but then if you don't really dig deep into understanding what are the roots of the problem and what's kind of the current level of awareness, maybe you would deliver a solution there, but then they would sell the parts, or they would take it apart, or they would never use it. And that has happened a lot in these rural communities. So when I started to hear more and more of these types of stories, I realized that there should be someone who are delving really deep into these communities and listen really hard to what they want and help evaluate what exactly do they need. Do they need training? Do they need education? Or do they just need economic well-being and they aren't ready for anything else? Or are they actually ready for everything? So it's kind of through that phase that I realized that we want to create an evaluation system to help better evaluate what these communities need exactly, and then help deliver the right type of solutions to the communities that most need them. So it was kind of in that process that all these started to build up, and the momentum started, and it kind of just kept rolling. Yeah.
Okay, great. But why do you choose to do it now?
Yeah, why now?
Yeah, why now?
Yeah, so I think right now it's also like a very interesting time because around 2008 or 2009, around that time and a little after, air quality started to become a really huge issue. Everyone started to become aware of like, the PM 2.5 in the air and, all the smog that's happening. So all of these rising awareness about environmental issues started to gather, and people started to become more and more have this more and more citizen awareness. And actually with air quality, what happened was that everyone started collecting their own air quality data. They started buying their own sensors, recording their own PM 2.5 results, and then they started reporting that on Weibo and on a lot of different platforms. At first, those were disregarded, right? Like people weren't ready to publicize that information about how bad our air quality actually is. But over time, as that momentum kept pushing, and as more and more people started becoming aware and started collecting that information, ultimately it became like sort of a movement, and more people started to really understand this type of issue, and then ultimately this became a transparent thing. So now it's something that anyone can openly talk about, and it was really through everyone collectively raising their own awareness and collecting their own information and helping each of themselves understand it better, and then as a collective we're ready for solution, right? So you see how that air quality movement came about, and then now it's starting to shift to water quality. Now a lot of organizations are working to solve the issues of these like black smelly rivers, like surface water. So surface water is becoming sort of the next focus because there's all these waters that are contaminated with a lot of pollutants in the water, and you can see the colors changing. So the government designated specific black smelly rivers, about 2,000 of them, so across China, and people would go and survey them and report back to kind of track the progress of the treatment of these black smelly rivers. So basically all these water information, at least for surface water, now is becoming more and more transparent. And then for us who are doing more on the groundwater side, right, because with rural drinking water, a lot of it is groundwater. And with groundwater, we do think it's going to be the next big thing. So after surface water, something on the surface where everyone can see is treated, people are going to have to start shifting to groundwater because our groundwater is being depleted. A lot of the quality is having issues, and a lot of people still are using groundwater for different types of water sources. So we see that trend from air to surface water to groundwater, and potentially also to soil, right? So you see that direction, you see that push for data openness, push for solution connection, and a lot of it is going in that direction. So we're just going along the tide to work on this issue that is going to become the next big thing, and we believe in environmental monitoring and environmental remediation. Yeah.
What do you think, like the stage your organization is now? Like at the beginning or primary or medium or?
Yeah. I think we've passed our ideation phase. Basically, we passed just the idea part, but we're definitely still in the pilot run. We started to launch our data platform. We're still in the process of building it, completing the database, and completing the data visualization system. So that's something that's still in the works. And with that data platform, as it's being built now, we're also connecting the teams that all the local field teams onto this network. That's something that we're currently doing right now, is to register all of our teams onto the system. And then, since we're using this data to provide services to solution providers so that they can better enter the rural communities, we're also pitching this data platform to a lot of different foundations that we're working with. So some of the foundations have already started to establish initial connections with us so that they can better go into these rural communities. So basically, we are having a pilot run of this data platform, and we're trying to see how we can start from this one idea and then scale it to more places. Right now, every year, maybe we could only send about 30 teams out into the field or work with 1 to 2 solution providers, and that's still not enough, right? We want it to be scalable. We want to cover as many rural villages as possible, but we want to find one model that works, that can more effectively connect the solutions to the problems, and then after we close the loop through this data platform, then we can replicate it and make it a more scalable model. So I think we're still at the place where we're figuring out how to work it out in one place or a couple of places, and then we want to see how it can be replicated over and over again. So we're still I would say we're at the pilot stage where we're trying to figure out how to close the loop in this 1 or 2 specific locations, and then we want to rapidly replicate it so that this can be a model that can be scaled to as many places as is needed. Yeah.
What kind of progress has been made by now?
Yeah, so since our first field trip in 2015, we've already sent over 90 teams across China to different rural communities. We covered about 800 villages. We did some sampling in each of these villages, and we were able to gather over 2,000 sets of data from all these villages to mostly to indicate like what kind of water quality they have, what type of sanitation status they have, what's their general water awareness, and what are some of their current complaints in each of these regions. So basically, we were able to get some basic water quality information and status across a lot of these villages. So that's our first stage. For right now, it's just on the data collection end. And then we're trying to progress from that. After that, what we did was that we standardized all these data into like a uniform data system and put it into like a specific database. And after doing that, we also started doing more data visualization in terms of mapping them and creating like which villages has what kind of water quality, and mapping them, making them into different colors, and so that people can more readily see which area has what problems. So now we're at the visualization stage, and then at the next step, we want to generate more insights based on these data. Basically, as I've mentioned before, we were trying to understand, is this village ready for solution? Does this village need more education before a solution can be introduced? Does this village need more money, or can they already buy specific type of products, right? So all those levels of different solution readiness criteria, that's something that we're still trying to figure out. How do we get that information or generate those thoughts from this data system? So that's something that we're still in the process of working out. And what we've already done was that we figure out how to more effectively collect more data and display them in effective formats. But now we're trying to use them to make more data-driven decisions. So we're in between the raw data and then data decision making. So we're trying to close that gap right now. But we do have a lot of partners with existing foundations, research agencies, and companies who have used our data to either do their own R&D or develop their own products. And we've successfully worked with one company to deliver a number of purification products for a number of rural villages across Yunnan. So that partnership has helped us successfully deliver solutions to people who need them, and we're trying to replicate that model to deliver more solutions to areas where we find problems. And this summer, we are partnering with another research agency to find out regions where there are arsenic issues, because this research agency has developed a pouch that has coagulants that can help precipitate arsenic and other sort of turbidity-causing issues in the water. So we're trying to find them pilot sites so that they can deliver their products and solve those issues. So it's a growing progress, but we're shifting from just data collection part now to more data-driven solution, kind of doing this shift at the moment. Yeah.
Okay, so what do you think are the major difficulties for your organization to collect the rural water data?
Yeah. Yeah, I think because we want the data to be more in depth, right? So there is a cost to collecting these data. testing them is a cost, and then the labor is also a cost because you do need to go into these communities and do very intensive surveys and one-on-one conversations or sort of these focus group sessions that that can generate a lot of information from these communities. So you do need a very dedicated group in each of these communities to collect that data. So I would say the cost of the data is an issue, and also accuracy of the data, which basically depends on the dedication of the group that's collecting this information. And then ultimately, after all this information is collected, how are you going to most effectively use it? And then that also would also influence how dedicated and how motivated these teams are, because they need to know where their data is going and how that data is being used for them to be really motivated to collect the right type of information and be continuously doing that type of work. But because some of these data is a more long-term progress, without that very specific sort of solution-driven or like a very, very specific solution pathway, sometimes teams would lose motivation. So that's been like a consistent challenge, is how do we maintain a sustainable interest of each of these teams? How do we make sure they collect accurate data? And also, how do we make sure that the data is really reflecting what's happening on the ground? So a lot of those are things that we're continuing to work on by introducing more types of training, introduce their familiarity with our with the logic that we work with, our strategy, and also kind of giving them more basic ethical, like scientific ethics training, so that they really understand what's the value of data, what's the value of correct and accurate data. So all those things we're trying to put into the system to make sure that this process can be as scientific and as accurate as possible. And the students and the agents that are in the field collecting this information, they can be as motivated, and they can also be gaining something through that process. And also, like, another thing that's really important is that we want to make sure while we're interacting with the villagers, we're not just taking information from them, we're also giving something back. But sometimes when we find a problem immediately, it's not something that we can solve on the spot. So that's also a challenge that sometimes our team face, is that when they're communicating with the local villagers, sometimes they don't really have an answer for a lot of their questions. And that's something we're still trying to figure out, is how much do we tell them about their issues, and how ready are we to help them solve things on the spot. I think what we can do now is at least raise that awareness, or have that discussion with them. But there is a limitation to how much we can help right there. But we do want to make sure we're not just going in, taking things out, and not giving them anything back. But we also want to make sure that we're not leaving them with a lot of concern and confusion, but with no solution and leaving them feeling really powerless. So there's a delicate balance that our team have to strike with the local community. Yeah.
According to your understanding, how many NGOs are doing this kind of rural water collection, rural data collection like yours in China?
Yeah, I think there are a number of organizations, maybe about like less than 10 that I'm like aware of, that are doing sort of rural work. They're not necessarily collecting water data. Some of them are collecting just rural field data in general, like understanding rural resources, like what does this community have, right? And some of them are doing rural empowerment, and some of them are doing rural, basically recycling or trash, like that type of work. And then there's also organizations that are collecting rural socioeconomic development data to assess the investment readiness of a rural village. So there's different organizations that are collecting data of different types and for different purposes. But I'm not aware of any other organization that are collecting water quality at such a wide scale as like us, but I do know a couple of organizations that are developing their own DIY water filters to deliver to rural communities. So they've surveyed a couple of villages, and then they work with the local villagers to develop some DIY local manufacturing-based water purification systems to deliver to the local communities. So we are aware of some organizations that are doing that, but I think we're one of the few that are really going so wide and so in depth into all these rural communities to create a rural water map. But I think there's room in collaboration between us and other rural-based organizations. So we're also trying to reach out to all these other organizations that already have people based locally, so that we can use their existing network to help them collect the information and become the voices of their own communities, so that we can enrich our own platform and help them solve the water issues that they're facing. Yeah.
When did the non-point source pollution of rural areas in China begin to appear and deteriorate?
I think it's probably recent as, the agricultural revolution happened. Like, a lot of people are, in the past, most people, when they, when they were planting things or when they were putting in fertilizers, a lot of them are more natural fertilizers. Some of them even use their, what's collected in their toilet into their farms, right? So I would say in the past, 10, 20 years, there's a spike in using fertilizers and pesticides, and a lot of these things are starting to be used. And as you use them, the pesticides, they gain, like the pests, they gain more resistance to pesticides. So you actually have to use more for it to become effective. So it's kind of like a self-reinforcing cycle, because the more you use, the more you have to use it. The more you use, the more fertilizer you use, the more food that's grown, and the more nutrients that's taken out of the soil. So the more you have to put on. So basically, it would reinforce itself and cause people to use more and more of these. And what it would cause is, again, when there's rain or when there's runoff, a lot of these fertilizers or pesticides would potentially get into surface water, and then surface water, groundwater, they're all connected as a system, so it would likely get into the groundwater. So those things are definitely issues that a lot of these communities are facing. So right now, I think what the government has tried to do is that they're just directly sending pipes down to a lot of villages, as many as possible, to cover them with as many pipelines as possible. But the issue with pipes, again, is that first of all, the government's pipe only would reach your village, but to build the pipe from the village center to your own household, that would take extra cost, and some households are not ready to do that. So basically, they just won't. They just don't want to pay that extra money for pipe water to be delivered to the household. So they'll still be drinking groundwater, and that's still more likely to be polluted by a lot of these overfarming. So those are issues that are still happening, and I do see it as a continuous issue. And non-point source is also very hard to track. So that's an ongoing problem, definitely. Yeah.
According to your statistics, how many people are actually affected by this unclean underground water?
Yeah. So right now, official data, data that will be data from around 2011. That's the last time that the data has been publicized on a large scale. At that time, that was about I would say about 300 million people that are still facing these types of challenges at that time. But I think in the recent years, the government's been really speeding up the process of building pipe water systems and better rural infrastructure. So that number is likely to have decreased. But even as that number decreased, more number would come up, because a lot of the old pipelines, they would have new trouble with them, or a lot of the old pipe systems, the water would run out because of droughts. So it's likely that while millions have gotten their new water, a few other couple millions might have lost their existing water sources. So it's kind of like the system where you're feeding new system, putting in new infrastructures, and the old one keep breaking, water sources keep running out. So it's kind of a race to solve these issues while preventing the old ones from breaking apart. Yeah, so it's definitely a challenging thing to do. Yeah.
By long-term use of this kind of polluted underground water, what kind of harm will it bring to villagers?
Sorry, can you say that again? What harm?
If we use this, sorry.
Yeah.
If we use this kind of polluted water for a long term,
yeah.
So what kind of harm will it does to villagers?
Yeah. It depends on the different types of contamination. There's a lot of different contamination that can happen. For example, with fluoride, the issue with fluoride is that it prevents calcium intake. So it would affect calcium from becoming part of your body. So your bones or your teeth or everything drinking would potentially have different types of problems. People would experience maybe ankle or wrist or different problems with their different joints, and that has happened in some of the villages with high levels of fluoride in their water. And sometimes the solution is actually to give them more calcium pills if they don't have alternative water sources. Maybe like helping them to ingest in more calcium is part of the solution. That's what some of the villages in India were actually doing. And then there's also other, heavy metal contamination, and that would be related to cancer. As we all know, along the Huai River, there's a lot of cancer villages, and a lot of those are a result of potentially industrial pollution of the water sources, causing high levels of heavy metal. And all these different heavy metals, they have a likelihood of raising the level of cancer occurrence. So it's likely to result in those types of issues. And then there's other issues like arsenic. Arsenic is also related to a lot of skin conditions and a lot of other types of problems. And some of them, if you have lead in your water, which before it happened in Flint, Michigan, in the U.S., a lot of people know that there's lead contamination there, but there could potentially be lead contamination in China as well. And lead contamination, it would also cause brain damage in kids, basically lowering their IQ level from birth. So a lot of these things, they could be neurological damages, cancer-causing skin issues, bone issues, so a variety of different issues. And I think one of the core challenges is that because water is only one source that we are intaking food, like we're taking water, we're eating food, we're getting exposure to air and soil. Sometimes if you have some sort of a condition or a sickness, sometimes it might be hard to trace what exactly caused that. Is it exposure at work? Is it actually the drinking water? Is it food? Is it something else? So sometimes it becomes hard to really give an answer to that. And that also becomes a thing where people deny it's the water that caused them the problem. So I think if there are better ways to really trace how that problem came about and really have a better linkage or connection between these health issues and the environmental conditions, I think people might actually have more awareness about their own health or the water that they're drinking. But it's because that disconnect that people don't really tie their own health conditions to water. Sometimes they think it's just fate, it's destiny. They don't really think it's because of environmental conditions. So that sort of awareness or connection should be strengthened. Yeah.
Where do you conduct the water quality research and collect the relevant data?
Mm-hmm. So right now, our sites are across China. It depends a lot on where we have our local teams and local networks. So we partner a lot with local universities and university students who majors in environmental studies or chemistry. And a lot of these students are originally from the rural communities, so they have the knowledge and also the experience to go back into their own communities. So it depends on sort of what sites they choose to go back to and what problems they report to us. So we look at all the places that are reported and proposed to us and select the sites that are most worth going to and select the teams that have the best credentials. So overall, right now we're covering across a number of different locations. And our next step, I think we're going to look at all of the sites that we've been to and all of the issues that have been reported in the past 2 to 3 years. And we're going to try to narrow down into a few more specific locations to really think about solution connection and revisiting the sites to see what the problems are at now. So we've been doing sort of a wide scanning process in the past few years, and now we're trying to narrow down on more specific cases in each different places. Yeah.
Who are you aiming for to provide data?
I think to get the data, we are looking at rural villages that have very clear water quality issues. And we're looking at people with non-tapped drinking water, most specifically where pipe water haven't reached yet. So we're looking at mostly villages with groundwater and places where water infrastructure isn't completed or places that have potential contamination. So those are the sites that we're mostly targeting. targeting at. And people who are actually collecting the data are mostly either local NGOs or local students. And the reason that we choose students and NGOs is that they have the capacity or they have the knowledge to conduct this type of water information collection. And also they have a good connection with the local communities, because we do require that within the student team there is at least like one member that are from the community, or someone who is very familiar with where to go. So someone, so someone who's very familiar with where to go and who to talk to. So to look at those criteria, we chose either local community NGOs or local student networks that can very easily go into these places and gain the trust and collect the information that we need. Yeah.
What if after you collect all the data, who do you provide this data to?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so right now we partner mostly with foundations, research institutes, or companies. Those are the major categories that we work with to offer them the information from these rural communities. For companies, the data is mostly helping them to do better R&D, to develop products that are aiming at rural communities or other types of communities that they're interested in. So we collect them information about product development and about specific water problems. So that's one thing that we're focusing on. And then on the next level, we're also working with research institutes. For example, for the research institutes that we're working with now, as I mentioned before, they have a product that they want to distribute, and they want to find pilot sites to help them distribute this product and gain feedback to see how their product is working out. And then for foundations, they actually have a lot of resources that they want to put into communities that most need them. So they do want to look at sites. They want to look at new sites to support and new funding channels to offer the funding. And they also want to make sure that the communities is ready for this type of funding. For example, as I mentioned, if some of these are donating to rural schools, and if the school doesn't have the hardware infrastructure to contain, the water purification system, then it isn't a school that's fitting for donation, even if it needs a lot of clean water solutions. So we would use that information that we gain from these communities to help these foundations make decisions. So these are the different types of entities that we work with, and they use our data to guide either their research, decision making, funding distribution, and things like that. So that's kind of the relationship that we're building with each of these entities.
Do you charge for providing this kind of data?
Yeah, it depends on who we work with. For research institutes, sometimes we don't. For companies, we generally do. And for foundations, it depends on the format that we work with. The foundations usually support the students in their traveling fees, like the room and board costs to go into these villages, and some of the testing costs. So basically, they support the student teams. And they might not pay for our admin fees, but they try to support basically the local cost of each of these teams to make this process more sustainable for us as well. And for just looking at our data part, we are setting up a subscription system where companies or foundations can subscribe to our platform to look at updating data or look specifically at different regions. And we're hoping to charge a more or less a flat subscription fee so that they can have access to certain regions that they're most interested in. The reason that we do that is to really help maintain the long-term sort of health of the platform, because to maintain and run this database, to keep updating the platform and sending teams out, a lot of those also incur costs. So we're trying to make ourselves also more professional by providing more professional data services with a professional platform. And to do that, there definitely needs to be high costs, and we want to make sure the service that we provide is worth it. So I think charging a fee for the platform and charging a fee for data services is the right way to go down the road, because it'll push ourselves to also become more professional in providing these types of services and making sure that our data is of the highest value, so that they can provide the value that that matches the cost. Yeah.
Yes. all the income goes back to the developing of your community?
Yeah, oh, absolutely. Yeah, it goes back to developing the platform, to supporting more IT employees or more strategic development employees, and just in general supporting a lot of our outreach fees and all the things like that. Because, yeah, there's a lot of cost included in the development of a platform and in cleaning up the data and in the data collection part. So we do want to make sure that we would have sustainable sources of revenue that can continuously cover these types of developmental costs. Yeah.
How do you conduct water quality testing and data collection?
Yeah, so what we do right now, there's several different types of surveys that we do. One is just directly testing for the water. So we record down, what water source is this from? Is it from groundwater? What type of water is it from? How long has this well been built? What is the general sanitation status of that well? So we collect some of the basic information about the water source, and then we take a water sample, and then we test the water sample. So in that process, it's more like a basic, rapid water quality assessment. So we do tests like that. And then we also do tests that are more sort of user behavior surveys. For example, we would show them a product and ask them, what do they think of this product? Have they used similar products? And look at the different characteristics of this product, so that they can really tell us for this specific product, what are some things that they prefer, what are some things that they don't. So that would be more like a user behavior or product evaluation. And then we also have surveys that are more like rural participatory surveys, where all the communities would come together and we would draw a map together collectively of the entire rural resources to really paint a picture about, what kind of problems are located where are the water sources located, which of these villages have what types of water. So we'll gain like a more overarching impression of the entire community. And the general order that we're trying to do this is that we would do the map first, so we'll understand which villages are worth going into, because we'll have a general impression of how the villages are distributed and how the water sources are distributed. And then next, depending on what our target is, we'll do more detailed surveys of either just the water quality or detailed surveys of their feedback to a specific product, or assessing the impact of past donations or past product distributions. So those are generally the types of surveys that we do, and the different methodologies that we engage with the local communities. And those are some things that are still under development. We have a specific survey team that are helping us develop these types of surveys and improve the survey mechanism, so that these can be better utilized in future surveys and in future clients that we serve. Yeah.
Why do you have to collect it on your own? Is there any other way to collect the data?
Yeah, I think that's something that we think a lot about ourselves as well. There are a number of official sources of data that are slowly opening up. Right now, water reservoir data, like reservoirs in terms of this is the water that we collect and use pipe to feed into all these communities. Some of these water reservoir data are becoming more and more open. So we would have some of those information available online. So potentially we can web scrape those data and use those to guide our choices of communities or where to go. So those information are helpful suggestions or guidance in addition to our data collection system. And the reason that we use our teams to really go in depth to collect that data is that we find just having simple water quality data not enough, because water quality only tells you so much. It doesn't really tell you about what the local people want, what their needs are, what their stories are, and do they want to solve the problem or not? Do they care about the problem or not? So a lot of those things are things that you really have to be there to listen to their voices, to talk with them, to understand. So I do think the intimacy with the community part is something that is very, very core to our mission, is making voices for them. And how can you make voices for them if you're not even there? right? So for us, that is something that's very important to what we do. But we do understand that it comes at a cost. So we're trying to balance it out more down the road. We're trying to look at what are official sources of data that can be used to complement our existing data sources, so it can lessen our burden to collect field data. But I do think being in the field is very important. I personally love being in the field, love talking with people and understanding what their needs are. And that was one of the reasons why I started this organization, is to be close with these communities, be close with people in need. So I do think that's a very important part of our mission, and that's also part of my goal is to also get these students or these people back into their villages to help them solve their issues, right? And if we're just collecting data, that process of becoming intimate with your own village, it won't be there. So I do think that's a valuable experience, and it can potentially bring up new linkages. For example, one of our past team leader, he was contemplating doing kind of rural development work as part of his career, and after engaging with us, it kind of reinforced his decision to become someone who takes on rural development or rural water issues as part of his career. So I do think that that experiences reinforce a lot of their own beliefs or their own life choices, and having more and more people becoming more and more dedicated to this field also in the future improves potential solutions that can be delivered. So I do think it's a very important bond to make. Yeah.
According to the data you have obtained or collected so far, where is the worst place? Where's the worst place that you can tell?
Yeah. So I think right now it's hard to evaluate worst because each area have different issues. I can only speak to some of the areas that I'm personally more familiar with. The area that I've actually traveled with them to is a lot of areas like to the very western part of China in Xinjiang, like that area. And their issue, a lot of it is very geological, like it's sort of like geogenic issues. It's not like, not necessarily contamination, it's just like their soil is just like very salty soil. So basically you got this water with very high total dissolved solids, very high salinity. The water, you taste it, it's very like salty, basically. So that would be definitely would be an issue. It would cause certain sicknesses, and it would be very hard to even drink it. So the local people are doing a lot of issues. They're doing a lot of things to try to solve these issues. They try to dig deeper wells, but it's a very hard thing because their soil, apparently, even if you go 500 meters deep, it's still like salty soil. So they dig a really, really deep well, and then they pump the water up, and it's still salty. So they can't really find solutions locally. So they're trying to channel water from another city to their own city, but that project is taking a long time to really come through. So right now they're still drinking this type of water. Yeah. So those areas you would see those issues, and it's not necessarily because of contamination. It potentially, yes, like I think agricultural contamination is also an issue, but you do see a lot of it is just because the ground there is just like that. And then of course, as we all know, along the Huai River, like a lot of villages have cancer issues, and these are actually officially recognized as cancer villages. So the issues there are pre-existing for a long time, and right now there's a lot of attention put into these villages, and I think it's becoming solved more and more slowly. Yeah. So it's becoming solved slowly. Yeah. As we go on. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Okay. Huh.
Can you please tell us, like, the current situation of China's rural water pollution?
Yeah. So I think with rural water, as I mentioned, what we see, a lot of the issues is either industrial pollution. So local industries, it would cause more heavy metal related pollutions in the water. So that's one type of pollution. And then the non-point source pollution, pesticides, fertilizers, and that will cause different types of organic pollution in the water. And then there's also pollution from the sanitation side. Sanitation in terms of people building their water sources very close to their toilets, and that could cause cross-contamination, raising the E. coli level or any sort of unhygienic bacteria in the water. So that could also be a source of water contamination. And also there's like I think those are the basic types of contamination associated with groundwater, right? So with groundwater, you would have all these different types of problems, and the most problem with rural water, people's drinking water sources is mainly because they rarely have another source of water to drink. So if they know their water is contaminated, what else can they do, right? It's not like in the city, it's very easy for them to buy another pint of water, bottled water, or something else. In the rural communities, that is very hard to do. So that is their key challenge, is that if they lose this water source, if they know it's contaminated, they might still have to keep drinking it. And so that's one of the key issues. But again, as I mentioned, in the past about 10 years or so, the government has been investing a lot of money on building rural infrastructure. So a lot of the pipelines have been built into a lot of rural communities and sending them piped water, which on some level should be cleaner than the groundwater that they have. But again, the issue with piped water is infrastructure, right? Is the pipes really safe? Is it really clean? And a lot of areas you have breakage in the pipes. So in a lot of the communities that we survey, the pipes would break, one time every month. So people would lose water, 3-4 days out of a month, like every week out of a month they would lose water, and then they would have to use water from their wells again or from surface water sometimes. So yeah, you do still have these issues with the pipes. And then another thing is also awareness. People would build a pipe to the village, but then people aren't willing to pay for their water, or they aren't willing to pay for their pipes because they don't really think that the pipe water is necessarily more clean. They don't really have that trust. They don't really build that trust with their pipes as they do with their own water that they can see, right? So then all these issues would are posing challenges for clean pipe water to reaching each of these families. So again, yeah, you would have all these issues. And then another issue that rural water is facing is that a lot of people are coming in with solutions. People are selling them water purifiers. People are coming in with water tankers. But with rural people, they don't really have that consumer awareness to ask, where is this water from? And is this product safe for me or not? So you do go into these villages and you see people buying water purifiers that doesn't even have a brand on it. And when you ask them, do you trust these products? They said, oh, someone came onto our door and sold us this, but then now, it's not working and we don't know who to talk to. And the person that sold this to us, we can't reach him anymore. So you do get all these consumer-related issues. And then in my own hometown, people right now actually are drinking water from a tanker. So there's a big truck that comes in with a lot of water and goes from house to house, and people would grab a hose and then just get water from that tanker. But if you ask them, where does the tanker come from, no one really knows. And some people saw, oh, the tanker is actually just their own well water. People saw them gathering water from their own well. So it's basically the same type of water that everyone else has. They just think somehow because it's in a big truck, it's cleaner. But yeah, there's not that level of awareness. And because now people's economic status are becoming better, they want cleaner water, they want better lifestyle. And it's a kind of a gap that's starting to happen in rural communities, is that their desire to have better life quality. And so right now, since not a lot of products are there yet, a lot of people with bad products, or a lot of people with something that's not as good quality would come in and take advantage of these types of things. So all these combined together are a collective of the challenges that rural communities are facing. Yeah, yeah. All these coming together. Yeah. So all these issues coming together form a collective challenge that a lot of these the rural communities are facing. Yeah.
What kind of problems have you encountered during the process of conducting the rural water quality and data collection?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think there's quite a number of interesting problems that you would see. This is one of our teams that they were in the villages collecting these information, and then basically they encountered a lot of distrust from the local community, and they were trying to talk with the villager and ask them issues, and the villager says, "Oh, who are you? Like, what are you? What's your goal here? What are you trying to do?" And then they question like the credentials of our students, and they actually took away their ID cards. Yeah, like they just say that, oh, you know, I don't trust you. I'm going to take your card until you show me like real, like what are you actually trying to be here to do. So you would encounter some people who have distrust against you or like a little bit of paranoia, right? So those are issues that we do have to learn how to resolve. And it's best if you do have local connections and have basically backup to help you go through these situations. And then there are also other problems. In that case, some of our teams would actually find water contamination. When they test for the water, they would see pretty heavy problems that the villagers are talking about or the data is showing. And in those cases, they want to provide a solution, but sometimes the solution is not like immediately available, right? You can't immediately give them a water filter or something, so you only know that there's a problem and you can give them recommendations, but you can't be the one to solve their problems. So that is something that a lot of our teams find really hard to accept, is that they would see the problem and they would want to solve it, but then they know their capacity is limited. They can't solve it on the spot. So basically the villager would be somehow a little disappointed, or the villager would also say that, I know these problems, but I don't have the money to really, solve it. So I'm just gonna leave it as is. And then our students leave really disappointed. So all these cases happen, and then we try to, we try to walk through these issues with each of our team to really paint a larger picture, or to tell them in the long run how we're trying to get these issues solved. But when you encounter these problems on the spot, they're still really challenging issues that that each of the field teams are facing. Yeah.
What do you think about the implementation of laws, regulations, and policies for rural water pollution prevention and control?
Let's see. I think that's a big question. That's a policy question. Yeah, that's a big question. But I do know that the Center for Disease Control, they are doing relatively consistent monitoring of rural drinking water and sanitation status. And right now, I think raising awareness about rural water quality, and also building better sanitation, building new toilet infrastructure. That's something that they're pushing heavily in a lot of the communities. But again, it depends on the region. Some areas you could see, for example, in like Ningxia that we visited, right? That area, like you would actually see that the infrastructure is there. Things are improving, and people have actually come in to test for water quality, and that's probably like a priority region for the local government to really get these issues solved. But then for some other regions, you wouldn't see it as much of a priority, and water infrastructure isn't there. And when you ask the local community member, has anyone really come in to test for their water, they would say no one has ever come in. And also, even for water monitoring, most of the monitoring of groundwater is public wells. They rarely go into each individual households to test their own wells, especially these shallow groundwater wells, which are the wells that are more likely to have problems. So in those cases, even though you know generally what this issue is like, you might not really know each of the household issues. So the monitoring has gaps that's at the individual level. They don't really have data at the individual level. And as for prevention, I think we all know prevention at point sources is easier. Point sources of like industries and factories nearby. That's not in the sense that it's monitored well, but it's easier compared to monitoring non-point sources. So we'll talk about these separately. For point sources, right? In rural communities, again, it's very hard to monitor, especially for a lot of these small industries. You want to monitor them, but a lot of their livelihood actually depends on their capacity to pollute, right? Because as long as one small factory pollutes, they would lower their costs by a lot because they don't have to treat their water. So they lower their costs by a lot, they lower their prices by a lot, and all the other factories have to compete with this factory. So all of them would would pollute. And that's basically what happens in a lot of rural communities, not just in China, in India as well, is with these small and medium scale factories, enterprises. A lot of them survive by polluting. And so that's why there has been recent regulation to shut down all paper mills below a certain size in Henan, in a lot of regions. That has happened because they just can't find any other way to deal with it. It's just insanely hard to monitor, and these industries just very negatively compete with each other through polluting the environment. And also, when they pollute the environment, they pollute it secretly at night. Right? So you can't really go there and monitor them. When you go there, they don't. Everything's fine. And then they pollute at night, and then they wait for it to dilute, and then everything seems fine again at daytime. So those things happen. And so one of the things that the government started doing is to just shut them down, right? So that's something that's been in place for point sources. I'm sure down the road, better implementations of law would be in place. And there are actually a lot of other nonprofits that are monitoring specifically industrial pollution, and they actually put sensors near like where the polluting pipes are placed, so it would continuously monitor. So even if they pollute at night, they would see that. So there's actually a lot of other nonprofits that are working specifically on industrial pollution prevention, and they're helping the government to monitor these types of pollution, and they're doing pretty well. And for non-point sources, it's even like a harder business, right? Because how do you monitor it if it's just like runoff from agricultural lands, and agricultural wastewater is just like going into the rivers and stuff. And especially for most rural communities that we visited, a lot of them rarely have places where like a central waste dumping place or a central sewage system. Most of these places, they just pour their wastewater down down into the river, or throw their trash nearby the river, because they still don't really have these centralized systems. So it's kind of inevitable that it would contaminate river water, it would contaminate groundwater. And it's but recently, again, more and more villages that we visit, we see more centralized system. We see potentially locations with new pipelines built in, and we see a lot of new technologies developed, like gardens that are helping to filter water before they run off into rivers, right? So basically, these are purifying gardens that they try to put in place. There are new technologies are coming in, new systems are coming in, and they're trying to centralize the process of treating wastewater, at least household wastewater and household waste. So I think it's on the rise. It's a positive trend, but again, there's a lot more work to do, especially with non-point sources pollution, which is a pretty wide-scale issue, and I think that would take a long time to solve, because it's even impossible to monitor. Yeah.
What kind of progress has been made through implemented all these laws, regulations, and policies?
Yeah. I talked a little bit about it. Yeah, some of the policies. Yeah, I think again, as we mentioned, is that nonprofits and governments working together to monitor these industries. I think that's a big progress that has been made. As we know, there's a number of other organizations like Luwang, like IPE, and like a number of them. They really work on. Some of them even work on using satellite imagery to monitor, like, is this area like why does this area have like water that's of a wrong color, right? So you would look at these organizations that are helping the government to monitor existing pollution data, or sending volunteers actively to be near the sites of pollution to look at what pollution is happening, right? So that sort of work is really giving a lot of pressure to companies that are polluting, and helping them to really strengthen their own environmental schemes, because they know people are watching and it's going to affect their image. And I don't know if you know or not, but IPE, they're doing supply chain monitoring as well. Basically, they know that these companies, even if they pollute, they might not care, but then they are producing things for companies like Apple, companies like H&M, who cares a lot about their public image. Then they use these companies to pressure their supply chain, to pressure companies like Foxconn, right? Because Foxconn produces for Apple, so they would kind of use their supply chain and tell Apple, if you pollute in China, we're going to tell on you. We're going to let everyone know that your supply in China is contaminated. So then Apple comes back here and tells all the rural factories in rural China and just say, if you keep polluting, if your standards are not meeting the standards that we want you to meet, we're just going going to change, switch suppliers, right? So that's a big pressure that are put in place. So you would see all these really smart ways to reinforce to better enforce regulation, and they're really implemented in kind of these like smart systems, evaluation systems, and pressure systems to help companies really learn the importance of environmental regulation. Even if they don't really care about the environment, they will find other ways to make them care for it. And this is becoming more and more possible as the overall environmental awareness is raising, because it's through the raising of that awareness that they can sort of instill that pressure. So I would say that is a big thing that are happening, monitoring existing industries and using creative ways to create greener industries. And now they're also looking at green finance in terms of looking at people who are investing in different factories and different companies, because these maybe like a coal factory or maybe like a steel factory, they don't really care as much about their public image. But then there are people who are investing in them who cares if their money is going to like a green source. So they're actually evaluating these, they're using a green finance system to evaluate if this company is green enough. Like, how can you make sure your investment portfolio is greener, right? So within these newer systems, they're basically trying to make people who have environmental awareness to make greener choices, and in those greener choices, they're pressuring companies who have less environmental awareness to be pressured to make more environmental choices. So I would say that's a big trend that's actually working out pretty well. Yeah.
你渴吗？
还好。
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 你就是想喝点水还是继续？
继续吧，
继续啊 ，OK。How can we completely solve the problems of rural water pollution in China?
Yeah. I would say that's a huge problem that has a lot of different layers. From my point of view, just for my organization, I think I can only speak this much, right? Because I don't think solving everything is something that I can speak for. At least on my end, what I'm envisioning is a system where anyone who reports water problem can, their information and their voices can be visualized immediately and can be sort of placed there and say that this is a problem that we're facing. And then in the future, when our system is built better, there will be more automatic connections, like, right, this person reports a problem and then this person reports a problem, and you would see all the problems that are there. And then you would also see solutions, like this problem has been solved by whom, this problem has been solved by whom. So you would see like a solution network, and then you would see a problem network, and you would see problems that have already been solved and problem that hasn't been solved. And for those problems that haven't been solved, then there could be an algorithm to say, okay, there are similar problems that have occurred here and here and here, and this is how they've been solved. Can those also be solved similarly here? So basically, you would get all these recommendations for people whose issues haven't been solved based on those places where similar issues have been solved. So there will be more sort of these recommendation mechanisms that allow better connections to say that it's a two-way thing, right? So for people who report the problem, you would say, okay, we suggest you reach out to these organizations that they can probably solve your problem. And for organizations who want to come in, they would say, oh, we recommend you've looked at these sites, and these are other sites that might also be something that you can help with, right? So then that process will be more organic and more automatic. So we don't actually have to keep manually making these connections and manually introducing resources and pushing people to come in. There could be automatic connections that say, okay, these are areas that have been solved, these are areas that haven't, and out of all these people who've reported problems, how many haven't been solved yet, and who can come in, right? So in that process, then the problem reporting and solution solution process would be a more like a wholesome network that and can generate a more automatic connection platform. And all organizations that are working on rural water issues can come on and be here and show these are places that we've been to, these are issues we've solved, and these are places we're looking for. So we're envisioning that we'll be a central hub of everyone who's interested in this issue. They can either become problem reporters, problem solvers, and anyone who has resources can come on, and their resources can be part of the solution. So that's kind of our vision for the issue, is to really solve the issue, to help bringing resources and become this resource hub to help solve the problem. But again, what we're lacking right now, the solution hub sort of vision, what we're lacking is that we're not necessarily helping people solve problem from the root. Right? Maybe non-point source pollution are still happening. Maybe factories are still polluting. I think that would require extra effort and energy to evaluate how can we solve problem more from the root. Right now, what we are envisioning is that when problem has happened, how can we solve that problem there? But there's probably other preventional work, awareness before it even happens, and that would be another part of the story that's worth looking into. But that might be something that we're not ready to dive into at this point. But that would also be a very important part of the picture, because if you solve the issue and pollution keeps happening, then it's like it's not been solved. So both issues are equally important, and but it's a big problem. Yeah.
During this process, what should the government, NGO, and companies, individuals have to do to achieve the goal?
Yeah. So I would say there's a lot more collaborations that can be done. I think everyone can gain from the process. For example, what NGO is good at is they're good at awareness raising. They're good at capacity building, working with communities. And so what the government is good at is they're good at implementing something at a larger scale and pushing policy, pushing change, right? So I do think there's a lot of room for collaboration. Right now, at least what we see with what we see with surface water, like the Black Smelly River, is that the government wants these rivers to be clean. And they're putting in a lot of money to do treatment, to invest in the treatment. But the problem is that after it's been treated, sometimes they go back to being contaminated. And to do that monitoring, to work with the community to help consistently monitor these water, the government has to work with nonprofit organizations, because doing consistent monitoring and working with community to education, that is something that nonprofits are good at. So basically, everyone can play a different role. And for companies, what they're good at is they're good at innovating, right? They're good at providing more innovative solutions. Maybe for rural communities, they would need companies to develop new products that are more suitable for rural communities. Maybe they're cheaper products, but can solve specific issues that are located in specific locations. And there are other issues that rural communities are facing. For example, a lot of their pipes burst in the winter. So over the winter, they would have a long period where they don't have pipe water because their pipe is broken because of the ice. So in these cases, can companies come in and provide more innovative products to help rural communities get more consistent water, to get better quality water, right? So I would say everyone has a role to play in this process, and everyone can work to their advantage. NGOs can play the role of getting people on board and building trust and making sure that the villagers are owning what they have. And then the government can build the infrastructure and make sure that water comes in. And then companies can help innovate and make the process more seamless and bring in technology that sometimes help to supplement what the government has, but might not exactly adapt to each of the local circumstances. But then they can innovate and provide better solutions that help each communities face some of the additional challenges that government are not ready to solve. So I think all of these parties should be collectively working together to face these issues, and everyone has a part to play, and they all have something to gain, especially as the rural community, as I mentioned before, their awareness is raising. So the company has, they can find the potential market there, and building better trust with the government and the local community can also improve future work that the government wants to implement in the local communities. So all these parties have something to gain from that process. Yeah.
Okay. Last question.
Yeah.
Do you feel optimistic about the future of pollution prevention and control in China's rural areas?
Yeah, I would say optimistic is too big of a word, right? Like I wouldn't say optimistic or pessimistic. I would say that I see good trends. Sometimes I talk to the Center for Disease Control. I talk to people at the CDC, and they would tell us that data is becoming more and more transparent. And down the road, some years down the road, they might be open to making rural public water source data also more available to the public. So I think that's on the rise. Data transparency is on the rise. But on the other hand, nonprofit organizations are facing more and more challenges in China. And, in recent years, we've been restricting foreign funding from coming into China. So a lot of organizations have lost some of their original sources of funding, and now it's harder and harder to register as a nonprofit. So you do see all these new restrictions that are also coming in. At least what I'm seeing from the environmental world, data is becoming more public. There are more and more nonprofit organizations working in this field. There are more and more regulations that are built around, soil contamination, water contamination, and there are more and more people helping to advocate for these causes. And people's general environmental awareness has been rising ever since the air pollution issues, ever since all the smog around Beijing has been building. Everyone now is becoming more and more sensitive to environmental issues and their own citizenship. Their own sort of responsibility to take care of the environment. So I would say on that level, on a citizen level, I'm optimistic. But on a multi-scale level, there's so many factors. I wouldn't really say I have an attitude towards that. But again, with data transparency and data openness, I see a positive trend over there. And I would hope that that means more people can make use of this information to bring in more solutions to the people in need. But again, I would say it's not about having optimism or not. The problem is there. You have to solve it. Even if you're pessimistic, you still have to work towards it because, these are people's lives that we're talking about, right? So whether or not we have hope for the future, I would say that these things are worth doing. And I do hope more and more people would keep coming into this landscape, no matter how much hope we have or not. Use the time that you have, use the existing hope that you have to contribute whatever you can. Yeah, that would be my hope for anyone who's interested in this topic, Yeah.
I think it just came another question.
Sure. Yeah.
Do you think the government, the local government, they actually have the rural water, rural pollution data, like the soil, air, and water? Do you think they have?
I think the Central for Disease Control, at least they do have rural drinking water data, so they know some of the problems. But those data are very, very private. Yeah, they would not publicize those information. At least from what I know, they do. Not necessarily at the rural household level. They have it at the public level. So they know generally what's going on. But again, sometimes those data could also be outdated. Villages move around and, old wells go out of water. So sometimes those information are also not the first hand or not the most updated information. But those information are available. At least on some level as I know it, but you just can't get your hands on it. Yeah.
Do you think in the future, we as the public, we can really see the data like total transparent?
I think making it more transparent is possible, but then what I would question is the quality of the data, right? What do they want to show you? Maybe they want to show you only when the data is good. Right, like those things you have to question, because that's mostly because I've worked with Rural India's database a lot. So you would see problems with the data. You would see sometimes the data has showed an issue, but this data number is really weird. Or you would see people filling in random letters that are not supposed to be what they're filling in. So you would question who's collecting that data. It seems like they're putting in random information. Or then you would question is this data even valid or not? Right, so the accuracy of that data, or the frequency that they're collecting that data, and what they're trying to tell, what story they're trying to tell with that data, that would be another story. So making the data transparency would be step one, and then how do you validate that data? How do you build a system to ensure that this data is actually what it's meaning to tell? Right, one system that I know at least India is trying to implement is that when you collect a sample, you have to get 3 villagers to sign to say that this sample is actually from this well, and I watched the person test, and this is the result. And then they have to sign that to make sure that this data is a valid data. And then they also have this blind mechanism. Basically, they collect the sample, they put it in the lab, and they take off the label, so the people who are doing the test don't know which water is from where. just in case, they have some sort of interest with some locations and falsify the data, right? So they try to put in a lot of these mechanisms in place to make sure that people are not collecting false data. But again, sometimes things still happen, right? So I would say making it transparent is step one, and then we have to learn, how can we make sure that the data is valid? Are there, big data mechanisms that we can detect abnormalities with the data and say that these data are potentially falsified? So those would be the next step. But it's a process. I think making it more transparent would definitely be step one.
Do you think that your data will go public in the future?
I think down the road potentially. But again, I would say that what I would worry is that because unlike air quality, where the data is more direct, right? Like you just have PM 2.5, you have like very clear understanding of what it means. But then with water quality, there's so many parameters. Like if I collect 10 parameters, everything's good. Is the water necessarily clean? No, right? So then how do you communicate that to the public? And for some parameters, if it exceeds the standard a little bit, sometimes it's not too bad, right? Like for some parameters, it's more dangerous than others. For some of them, it's just very hard to control it at a certain level. So you would have a little bit of contamination, but if you drink it for 70 years, it might cause some issues, but not deadly issues. But then it might cause a lot of panic over something that's polluted for 10 days, and it's not a big issue, but it will cause a lot of panic, right? So how do you make sure you can convey that message in a very scientific and also very easy to understand way? And that's a big challenge for water compared to air. So when you make those information public, how do you first of all, how do you ensure that your information is accurate enough that it's worth making public? And also, how do you make sure that people are using that information, is using it in the right way, and not using it to cause a scare, to promote their own products, or to use it to go against the government or something? So you don't want it to be in the hands of the wrong people, basically. Yeah, so that's why right now we're not making it public. We're only trying to deliver it to people who are making the best out of it. But down the road, if we find better and better ways to introduce this information to the public, and people's overall, understanding of water quality or understanding of environmental monitoring rises, I think that would be a time where potentially this information could be more public. Yeah.